After a challenging 2 years, the global airshow industry burst back to life in 2022 in all its pre-pandemic variety and splendour. In this, the second film in our two-part Airshow Action series, we look back at the year's defining Warbird Airshow Action, the anniversaries, restorations and one-off displays that made 2022 stand out from any other year. At AirVenture, we enjoyed two standout displays this year, a four-ship Flight of the Cats formation and the L-39's Alpha Jets and MiG-29 of the Polaris Dawn formation team. This was a year that marked several significant anniversaries, among them 75 years of the United States Air Force and the 40th anniversary of the conflict in the Falklands. The latter was marked by the first ever airshow appearance of a civilian-operated Lynx AH-7. Larger aircraft were a big feature of the 2022 season. Air Legend in France staged a chronological showcase of historic transport aircraft, while Wings Over Illawarra in Australia featured rarely seen heavies from the Historical Aircraft Restoration Society, including their Super Constellation and their relatively newly acquired P-40 Orion. Also in Australia, Warbirds over Scone staged a four-ship display of P-40s, the largest gathering of Warhawks in the Southern Hemisphere since the 1940s. This is Warbird Airshow Action 2022. This programme was filmed by AirshowStuff and This is Flight. To see uncut, unnarrated videos of many of the performances featured in this film, visit the AirshowStuff YouTube channel. And to watch more than 20 hours of airshow documentaries in this style, filmed right around the world, then check out Airshow Dispatches from This is Flight. We start by looking back at displays marking some of the major anniversaries celebrated in 2022, and arguably the biggest of them all was the 75th anniversary of the United States Air Force. With the most famous American warbirds predating the formation of the USAF, the celebration was perhaps a little muted. As usual though, we did enjoy some excellent heritage flights, one of the most memorable being this F-35, AD-1 and P-51 sunset performance at AirVenture. Some of the most sought-after American jet warbirds were out in force this year, and perhaps the most exciting was Dean Cutshall's F-100F Super Sabre. The fastest and highest flying American jet of its era, more than 2,000 Super Sabres were produced for the United States and 4 export customers. The type was used most famously in Vietnam, although it had a patchy safety record, with almost half of the USAF Super Sabre fleet being lost in accidents by the time the type was withdrawn in the 1970s. Today, this is the only F-100 active on the airshow circuit. This particular performance was recorded at the Selfridge Airshow. A significant theme of the British airshow season was the 40th anniversary of the conflict in the Falkland Islands. While there hasn't been an airworthy Vulcan since 2015 and there are no Harriers flying in Britain, there is a growing population of Falklands-era rotorcraft being operated in civilian hands. Leading the UK renaissance of vintage helicopters is Andrew Whitehouse and his Historic Helicopters organisation. This is their Wessex HU-5. A British licence-built derivative of the Sikorsky H-34, the Wessex was used extensively in the Falklands, primarily for the insertion and extraction of Special Forces troops. But the type also played a surprise role in putting the Argentine submarine Santa Fe out of action when a Wessex HAS-3 attacked the Santa Fe with depth charges, causing extensive internal damage. The attack on Santa Fe was pressed home by the Westland Lynx, an extremely successful British helicopter design that has been exported to customers around the world, flying in the service of 18 nations. First flying in 1971, the Lynx was a truly outstanding design, to this day the fastest conventional helicopter ever built. It was also one that boasted outstanding manoeuvrability, thanks to its unique rigid monoblock rotor head, which allows the Lynx to fly fully aerobatic manoeuvres such as backflips and rolls. The Lynx has seen heavy use in conflicts as a battlefield utility and anti-tank helicopter over land, and as an anti-shipping and anti-submarine platform at sea. It was also used by the Blue Eagles aerobatic team. The British Army retired their last Lynx in 2015, and it was widely assumed the type would never be seen at a British airshow again. Andrew Whitehouse and his team restored this example in 2021, one of two ex-Army Lynxes that returned to flight that year. The Cosford Airshow 2023 saw the first ever flying display by a civilian-operated Lynx AH-7, as part of its Falklands commemoration.
The Army Lynx proved exceptionally successful in Operation Desert Storm in the Gulf in 1951. Almost forgotten now, I would say, the part they played there. The Navy used it as a British as well. But on a single day...
Another anniversary to garner much attention this year was the 80th anniversary of the Normandie Men, the famed French fighter squadron that fought on the Eastern Front as part of the Soviet Air Force during the Second World War. The Meaux Airshow in France put particular focus on this anniversary. They had aimed for an 18-ship formation of Yakovlev types from the 1940s up to the present day. However, when the show came to pass, these ambitions had to be toned down, perhaps in view of the political situation in Europe. But the show still marked the occasion, with flybys by a Yak-3UA and a Yak-9P, the latter having been returned to flight just 2 years ago. Also featured a formation aerobatic display by Yakko team, comprising 2 Yak-52s and a 4-seat Yak-18T. The Paris region is quite possibly the richest area for warbird airshows in the world, with the Meaux Airshow, Air Legend, La Ferté-Alais and the Salon de Bourget trade show all coexisting within just a few miles of each other. A few weeks after the Meaux Airshow, Air Legend took place just 20 miles to the south. It also commemorated the Normandie Men, with solo displays by the same Yak-9 seen at Meaux, and a Let C-11, the Czechoslovak licence-built derivative of the Yak-11 trainer. There was much more to air legend than just the Normandie-Niemen. There were also Second World War fighters aplenty, with a particular focus on two-ship aerobatic displays with the Spitfire, P-40, P-51 and P-47. The main theme of the 2022 edition was classic jets, and a great number of them took part in the flying display. The MS-760 Paris, CL-13B Sabre Mark VI, CT-133 Silver Star, DH-100 Vampire FB6, and two L-39C Albatrosses of the Patouille Fly and Fun aerobatic team. It wasn't officially listed as one of the themes of the show, but Air Legend 2022 also brought together an outstanding assortment of transport aircraft, which displayed consecutively and in chronological order. First up, the L-12 Electra Junior, which first flew in 1936. This was a smaller version of the L-10 Electra, envisioned as a feeder airliner. However, it proved too small for practical airline use. Only 130 were built, most of which were used for executive transport. This one was owned by Air Legend's commentator, French airshow and TV legend Bernard Chabert. He sadly passed away at the end of the year. Fast forward to 1941 and the military version of the DC-3, the C-47 Dakota, made its first flight. Then in 1949 followed the Nord 2501 Nor Atlas, a French transport aircraft designed to replace the Dakota, with a slightly higher payload and far easier loading of large and heavy equipment thanks to its rear loading ramp and unconventional twin-boom configuration. Although over 400 were built, this example, operated by Le Nord Atlas de Provence, is the only Nor Atlas still flying today. Next up came another French transport aircraft, the Dassault MD-312 Flamand. Although the Flamand's basic design predates that of the Nor Atlas, this version, which was optimised for multi-engine pilot training, first flew in 1950. Jumping forward to 2009, the transport showcase was rounded out by an A400M tactical display from the Armée de l'Air et de l'Espace. French airshows have long set the benchmark for ambitious multi-aircraft displays, mixed-type flypasts and historical reenactments. And, perhaps in a previous year, we'd have seen all 5 of these transport types flying in formation together. Sadly, that became much harder in 2022, as France's core airshow regulations were updated for the first time since the 1990s, and these kinds of displays have become much harder to stage. The change in regulations affected the planned Vietnam War reenactment, which was originally envisaged as a dramatic, multi-type performance, including piston, turboprop and jet-powered aeroplanes. Instead, only a two-ship performance featuring an OV-10B Bronco and AD-4N Skyraider could be arranged, but this still proved to be immensely enjoyable, including mock attack runs by both aircraft, followed by solo displays from each. The Bronco is operated by the Musée Européen de l'Aviation de Chasse de Montélimar, also referred to by the rather easier to remember initialism of MEAC. It performs an extremely sprightly and fully aerobatic solo display, but the crew have recently added several more capabilities to their performances, including parachute drops and nighttime pyrotechnic displays. We expect to feature both of those in next year's edition of Warbird Airshow Action. Our final display from Air Legend is a brand new formation team, Formación Quixote from Spain, flying two Cessna 337s dressed up as O2 Skymasters. In US service, the aircraft was used for observation, forward air control, and psychological warfare operations between 1967 and 2010. They've also been armed and used for light attack and counterinsurgency missions by the Air Force of El Salvador. Although production ended many decades ago, various nations continue to operate the type, with military deliveries of second-hand aircraft taking place as recently as 2017. Another of the great Warbird gatherings was at AirVenture in Oshkosh, which included 1,375 vintage aircraft in 2022. Among the flying display highlights, 4-ship legacy and heritage flights from the US Air Force and Navy. The Warbirds of America segments contain several star items, a 5-ship of C-47s, a formation including a Yak-9, Corsair, Bearcat and Mustang, classic jets such as this quartet of Psi S-211s and T-33s, a pairing of MiG-17 and F-86 Sabre, and one of just two airworthy L-1 Vigilants. In another memorable moment, Second World War fighter ace Clarence Bud Anderson was taken for a ride in a P-51D Mustang, flanked by other P-51s and a P-39, two of which were painted in the colours of his personal aircraft, Old Crow. But the most anticipated Warbird moment of the week was the 4-ship Flight of the Cats display, featuring a Tiger Cat, Hellcat, Bearcat and Wildcat. The Wildcat flying in the slot position is particularly rare, being the only Dash 3 model Wildcat still flying. The Hellcat, meanwhile, is a recent restoration, returning to flight in 2021. After 2 passes in a 4-ship formation, the aircraft split up for solo flybys from the Wildcat and Hellcat, followed by full aerobatic displays by the Tiger Cat and Bearcat. The Tigercat and Bearcat have a lot in common, in that they were both designed as carrier-based fighters during the Second World War, but both were delivered too late to see combat in that conflict. The Bearcat's main combat deployment was during the French Indochina War in the hands of the French Air Force. After the end of that conflict, surplus Bearcats were sold to several Southeast Asian nations, including South Vietnam, who used the type in the opening years of the Vietnam War. The Tigercat too was never used in the role it was designed for, too late to see meaningful use during the Second World War, and too heavy to operate from aircraft carriers as intended. Thus, the aircraft was used mainly as a land-based fighter, severely limiting its usability. However, they did see some use as night interceptor fighters at the start of the Korean War, and claimed 2 kills against Polikarpov Po-2 biplanes in the process. Both the Tigercat and Bearcat featured in this performance came from Lewis Air Legend. Another highlight of AirVenture, if not of the entire airshow season, was the debut of the Polaris Dawn formation team, comprising 3 L-39s, 2 Alpha Jets and, most excitingly, a MiG-29. The aircraft are operated as part of the Polaris Dawn astronaut training program, the brainchild of Draken International founder and SpaceX astronaut Jared Isaacman. All 3 types are still very much in service. The L-39 is still in production today in its native Czech Republic, and is the best-selling jet trainer in history. The Alpha Jet 2 has been sold worldwide, and is the mount of the French national aerobatic team, the Patrouille de France. The MiG-29 is a UB model jet, a 2-seat conversion trainer, and one of the 2 original Soviet MiG-29 variants. It was built in 1986, but has only around 1,000 flying hours. The MiG-29 was the Soviet Union's answer to the F-16, a super manoeuvrable interceptor fighter that was relatively easy to produce and maintain. It saw phenomenal export success far beyond the boundaries of the Soviet Union. It's currently in service with 23 nations and has previously flown for at least 10 more. It's also equipped several national aerobatic teams, including the Stars, the Smoky Bandits, and the Ukrainian Falcons. Due perhaps to the constraints of the aerobatic box at Oshkosh and the shortage of spare parts, This is a cautious and careful display which barely scratches the surface of the MiG-29's epic manoeuvrability. However, with the last Western MiG-29 military operators expected to retire the type by 2024, the chance to see it at an airshow in any form is an opportunity worth treasuring. Next up, we'll visit two of the biggest Southern Hemisphere Warbird airshows of 2022, Wings over Illawarra and Warbirds over Scone in Australia. Both shows featured Raptor Aviation's rarely seen Focke-Wulf 190, along with a large number of its allied adversaries of old. We also saw an unusual display by the Southern Knights, who swapped one of their T6 Harvards for an example of its Australian light combat derivative, the CA-3 Wirraway. Wings over Illawarra saw an impressive gathering of Second World War aircraft, with as many as 8 of them flying in formation. The focus, however, was very much on post-war transport and maritime patrol assets, many of which are operated by the locally based Historical Aircraft Restoration Society. Their DHC-4 Caribou and C-47B Dakota briefly joined in formation with the collection's relatively new S2G Tracker. This particular aircraft served with the US Navy during the Vietnam War, but was transferred to Australia after 9 of Australia's own trackers were destroyed in a hangar fire. It was retired in 1984 and passed to the Royal Australian Navy Historic Flight. The Historic Flight ceased operating in 2018, and the aircraft was taken on by Haas the following year. This is one of its first airshow appearances since then. One of Haas' most impressive aircraft is without doubt their AP-3C Orion. The aircraft was donated to Haas by the Royal Australian Air Force in 2017, but this was its first flying display appearance at a major airshow. The crowning jewel of the Haas fleet is their C-121C Super Constellation, an ex-military transport aircraft that now wears a paint scheme inspired by that of Australia's national airline, Qantas. The aircraft was acquired by Haas in 1992 and restored to flight in the United States. She was delivered to Australia in 1996. It's currently the only Constellation flying worldwide, but that should change in 2023 when a newly restored American example takes to the air. There were plenty of fighters at Wings over Illawarra, one of the highlights being a tail chase between an FW-190 and two Spitfires. The Spitfire at the back of the formation is Australia's newest, MH603, which was restored by Vintage Fighter Restorations in 2021. This was its first year on the airshow circuit. But the most memorable fighter displays of the year were at Warbirds over Scone, the home base of Pay's Air Service, one of the leading operators of piston-engine warbirds in Australia. Arguably, the highlight of the show was a four-ship display of P-40 Warhawks, believed to be the largest gathering of the type in the Southern Hemisphere since the Second World War. The quartet includes two P-40Ns, one P-40E and one P-40F. The latter is a rare example of a Merlin-powered Warhawk. Given the lackluster performance of the Allison-powered P-40, it was decided to upgrade the F and L models, equipping them with Packard Merlins. This substantially improved the aircraft's power and handling, but nonetheless, it was later decided to focus the Merlin on more important and more capable fighters to make best use of limited production capacity. Subsequent P-40s reverted to the Allison V1710. The four P-40s then joined up with two Spitfires, a Hudson, Avenger, Mustang and Corsair. Special schemes are something we perhaps associate more with the modern military than with historic warbirds, but 2022 proved to be an exception in Europe. This is mostly because of the political connotations of displaying the Soviet Red Star nowadays, with several major air shows and airfields banning the Red Star and any aircraft that bear it. This has led to some interesting paint schemes, black squares blocking out Russian markings, or stars hastily converted into arrows in most cases. The Yakovlev's aerobatic team applied Ukrainian roundels to their lead aircraft. This footage was recorded at Air Legend and shows the team's final ever airshow appearance, including 23 years on the airshow circuit, during which they performed more than 2,000 displays across Europe and Asia. Bob Davies' Yak 3 UTI, seen here at the East Kirkby Airshow, a more radical Ukrainian Falcons rebrand was in order. And the Norwegian Air Force Historical Squadron took a very different approach with their SB Lim 2, which now wears US Air Force decals. It represents a North Korean MiG-15 BIS that was captured by the United States in 1953. It was painted in US markings and used for test and evaluation flights by Tom Collins and Chuck Yeager. This display was filmed at the Southport Airshow. An aircraft of comparable role and era, albeit a much rarer sight on the airshow circuit, is Mark Hooton's Vampire T-11. Thanks to the purge of British classic jets over the last 10 years, this is now the last surviving UK-based Vampire in airworthy condition. Despite its incredible rarity, this one-time airshow regular hadn't performed a flying display for 8 years, but it made a triumphant return to the airshow circuit for a one-off performance at the Midlands Air Festival 2022. Here is another aircraft of outstanding rarity, the world's only airworthy PB-4Y privateer, the naval version of the B-24 Liberator. It doesn't fly at airshows very often, but the aircraft participated in the Spirit of St. Louis airshow, along with B-17 Yankee Lady and B-29 Doc. The aircraft is operated by Goshawk Unlimited, who are keeping it in an airworthy condition while conducting a gradual restoration. This was its first flying display appearance since 2019. Another highlight of the Spirit of St. Louis airshow saw 2 Hawker Hurricanes flying with a Mosquito FB-26 of the Military Aviation Museum. Of the 4 Mosquitoes currently in an airworthy condition worldwide, this was the first to be restored to flight, taking to the air in 2012. The restoration was completed by Avspecs, who are responsible for 3 out of those 4 Mosquitoes. A further 2 are currently being restored at their factory in New Zealand.
Alright, come by right now, do a nice fan break. There's the de Havilland Mosquito swinging on. Hawker Hurricane swinging on, left and right. That's opportunities may catch your fancy. Right now, parade review.
Now another display of classic UK warbirds, this time from the Battle of Britain Memorial Flight. The BBMF typically perform this 3-ship display at dozens of events across the UK each year, but there are several reasons to warrant its inclusion in this particular edition of Warbird Airshow Action. For starters, 2022 was the Lancaster's first full display season for several years. The solo Spitfire element of the BBMF's display was modified in 2022, making use of tall, graceful quarter clovers like this one. The manoeuvres were inspired by the shape of a crown and were introduced to mark the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. The Hurricane we're seeing in this performance is wearing a somewhat unusual paint scheme applied in 2021, a matte black night fighter scheme with specially adapted low visibility roundels. The BBMF's fighters have continued to attend air shows over the last few seasons, but the Lancaster has been largely absent from the airshow scene of late. It ended its 2019 season early for scheduled maintenance, which then overran, causing the aircraft to miss the entire 2020 season. It was only able to attend one public event in 2021, so it was a real pleasure to see this long-term staple of British air displays flying a full schedule once again in 2022. We end our programme at Thunder over Michigan, which featured a special formation of arguably the four most important fighters of the Second World War. They are the Spitfire, Mustang, FW-190 and the extremely elusive Bf-109G from the Erickson aircraft collection. After the show closed to the public, the Bf-109 was among several aircraft that performed a special night run for visiting photographers. It's with that night run that we end Warbird Airshow Action 2022. Don't forget that you can see uncut, unnarrated videos of many of these performances on the AirshowStuff YouTube channel. And see many more documentaries like this one by visiting This Is Flight. If you haven't already, check out part 1 of this film covering the best of 2022's military airshow action. Here's a look at what you can expect.